My name is Diane Myers, 34 years old, and last Christmas, my family's dinner table turned into a battlefield. The dining room shimmered under golden lights, the chandelier throwing flecks of warmth over polished silverware. Outside, Montgomery was quiet under a thin veil of winter rain, but inside the Myers house, the air was taut, humming with an old kind of tension, one that smelled faintly of wine, pine needles, and unresolved history. Mom stood at the head of the table, glass raised high, her ruby ring flashing as the firelight caught it. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice clear and cold, slicing through the murmur of conversation. The laughter around the table dimmed. My siblings, Rose, Carol, and Brian, leaned in, their eyes glinting like spectators before a show. I had a bad feeling, the kind that curls in your gut and warns you a storm's about to break. Mom smiled. "Mitchell's Foods has been sold, $15 million. And Diane," she turned toward me, pausing just long enough to twist the knife, "you get nothing." The room gasped in slow motion. I felt the floor tilt under me, the clinking of glasses echoing like distant thunder. Rose smirked, lifting her own glass in mock salute. "To new beginnings," she said. Carol clapped. Brian laughed, a sharp, careless sound that sliced deeper than Mom's words. To them, I was the failed daughter, the dreamer who left, the one who didn't deserve a seat at the table of success. I leaned back in my chair, the stem of my glass trembling between my fingers. My heart pounded, but my voice came out calm, steady, even. "Who's the buyer? Who's—" Mom's lips curved into that familiar, satisfied smirk, the one she used when she thought she'd already won. "Peak Ventures," she said. "They're taking it all." I let the silence stretch until it started to ache. Then, quietly, I laughed. It wasn't polite. It was deliberate, sharp enough to make Rose flinch. "Funny," I said, meeting Mom's eyes. "Because I am Peak Ventures." The words hung in the air like a spark before ignition. Dad coughed mid-sip, choking on his water. Carol froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. Brian's grin faltered, confusion spreading across his face. Rose blinked twice, the color draining from her cheeks. And Mom went still. Her wine glass wobbled in her hand, red liquid sloshing dangerously near the rim. "You're lying," she said, her voice trembling. I tilted my head. "Am I?" The room fell deathly quiet, the only sound the faint crackle of the fireplace and the soft thud of my pulse in my ears. For once, every eye at that table was on me, not with pity or dismissal, but fear. "You mean to tell us," Rose said slowly, her voice low and disbelieving. "You—" She pointed a finger. "Bought the company?" "I didn't buy it," I said. "I reclaimed it." Mom's expression faltered, her confidence bleeding out. "You went behind our backs?" she snapped. "You manipulated this deal?" "No, Mom," I said softly. "I saved Grandma Helen's legacy before you could sell it for your daughter's restaurant dream." The color drained from Rose's face. "You," she started, but the words tangled in her throat. Dad set his glass down with a soft clink, rubbing his forehead. "Susan," he said, turning to Mom, "did you know?" Mom didn't answer. She just stared at me, her jaw clenched, trying to process the fact that her irrelevant daughter now owned the crown jewel of the family name. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back. The motion was quiet, controlled, but it cut through the air like a verdict. "You taught me something, Mom," I said, my voice low. "When you fired me, when you told me I was too young, too naive, too much like Grandma Helen, you taught me how to fight quietly." "Diane," Dad began, but I didn't stop. "You sold the company for $15 million, I said. I'll turn it into 50 within 2 years. Not by cutting corners, not by cheapening her name, but by doing what Grandma taught me, making things better." The words landed heavy. Carol whispered something to Brian. Rose looked down at her plate, her hand trembling. And Mom, my mother, the woman who had built walls of control around every conversation, just stood there, her breath shaking, her glass still raised but empty. I smiled faintly. "So, Merry Christmas," I said. "Enjoy the payout. I'll enjoy rebuilding what you destroyed." Without waiting for their response, I walked away from the table, my heels clicking on the hardwood, echoing like punctuation marks on a story finally ending the way it should. Behind me, chaos erupted. Rose shouting, Mom demanding answers, Carol's voice rising in confusion, but it all blurred into white noise. At the door, I paused, turning just once to look at them, the family who'd measured worth and control and dismissed faith as weakness. They had sold Mitchell's Foods, thinking they were cashing out their last piece of power. But what they'd really done was hand it back to me. And none of them had the faintest idea of what was coming next. To understand why that moment at the dinner table mattered, you have to go back, long before peak ventures, before the betrayal, to the echoing hum of a factory floor in Montgomery, Alabama. Mitchell's Foods wasn't just a company, it was our family heartbeat. And at the center of it all was my grandmother, Helen Myers. The air inside the plant was always thick with salt and oil, the smell of freshly fried chips drifting through every corridor. I was 10 the first time she let me walk the floor beside her, her hair tied in a tight bun, her clipboard in one hand, a fountain pen tucked behind her ear. She was small, but commanded the space like a general. Consistency, she used to say, tapping the side of a conveyor belt. You earn trust one bag at a time, Diane. She'd kneel to meet my eyes, her blue-gray gaze sharp and kind all at once. Make things better, always. Those words stuck deeper than I ever realized. By 12, I was helping pack boxes after school, my fingers dusted orange with seasoning powder. By 14, I was keeping inventory, learning how every screw and shift connected to 1,000 small decisions that made or broke a business. Grandma Helen wasn't just teaching me about snacks. She was teaching me pride. When she passed, everything changed. Mom, Susan Myers, took over the company, and with her came a new language: profit margins, payroll, cost reductions. Words Grandma Helen never used in the same breath as quality. Where Grandma walked the floor with a clipboard and compassion, Mom ruled from her glass office upstairs. She replaced warmth with efficiency, curiosity with control. The first time I questioned her was when I was 15. The plant had started getting complaints, chips arriving stale, packaging torn. I suggested automating the sealing machines to fix it. Mom didn't even look up from her spreadsheet. "This isn't Silicon Valley, Diane," she said. "We don't need fancy tech, we need results." I remember the burn in my chest as I walked out of her office, the hum of the factory suddenly sounding less like progress and more like chains. Still, I didn't stop trying. I drew sketches of new packaging on napkins during lunch breaks, pitched ideas for a website to sell online. "We could reach the whole country," I told her once, showing her numbers I'd crunched on notebook paper. She didn't even glance. "You're a kid. Stick to school." It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the casualness, the way she said it like she'd already written my limits in ink. Then there was Rose, my eldest sister. Mom's golden child, the one who never had to prove herself because Mom had already decided she could do no wrong. Rose didn't just disagree with me, she mocked me. When I suggested automating the packing line, she smirked across the break room table. "What's next, Diane? Robots running the whole place while you sit back and dream?" The workers liked me, though. They'd nudge me as I walked by, whispering, "Keep going, kid. You've got ideas." But ideas don't stand a chance when the people above you mistake change for rebellion. By 17, I'd started running small after-hours tests with the night crew, trying new spice mixes, adjusting batch times. One night, we nailed a smoky barbecue blend that had everyone grinning like kids. The next morning, Mom found the order I'd placed for the extra seasoning and called me into her office. "You don't make decisions here," she snapped, her tone sharp enough to slice. "But it saved us money," I said, showing her the numbers. "I said you don't make decisions here." The door slammed behind me, and I realized something important that day. I could spend my whole life trying to fix things inside her system, and she'd still call it disobedience. Every generation of Myers women had run that company, but Mom had turned it into a fortress, guarding the past instead of building the future. Late at night, I'd lie in bed, hearing the hum of the factory in my mind. Grandma Helen's voice would whisper like an echo through time. "Make things better." I promised her I would, even if I had to do it somewhere else. Because deep down I already knew I couldn't save Mitchell's Foods from within. Not while Mom was in charge. Not while Rose stood by her side. But one day I would come back, and when I did, I wouldn't be asking for permission. The day I left Mitchell's Foods, Montgomery was heavy with heat, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes even goodbyes feel slower. Mom had called me into her office, Rose perched at her side like a shadow with a smirk. "Diane," Mom said, voice clipped, "you've become a distraction. Rose will be taking over your duties effective immediately." It wasn't a surprise, but hearing it out loud was a bruise I hadn't prepared for. "You're firing me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mom's eyes didn't waver. "You've had your chance. It's time to move on." Rose folded her arms. "It's for the best. You'll thank us one day." Her tone made it sound like she was offering charity, not betrayal. I looked at both of them, the polished desk, the framed awards from Grandma Helen's era still hanging behind them, and I realized what they'd done. They hadn't just pushed me out of a job. They'd erased me from my own legacy. So I said the only thing that kept my voice from breaking. Fine, I told him. I'll do it myself. And then I walked out. I left with 2 boxes, one of papers and one of fury. Jacksonville felt like another planet when I arrived. The air smelled of salt and ambition, and no one knew my last name. I rented a tiny apartment above a bakery and got a job at Coastal Foods, a consulting firm that specialized in streamlining small food businesses. The pay was modest, but the exposure was gold. I started at the bottom, crunching numbers, studying supply chains, memorizing how successful brands avoided the mistakes my family refused to see. I'd stay after hours, tracing logistics maps until my eyes ached. Every night, I wrote ideas in a notebook labeled Fix What They Broke. That's where I met Patricia Wells. She was a senior consultant with a reputation for turning chaos into order. Sharp suit, sharper eyes. She didn't tolerate excuses or flattery, which was probably why she noticed me. During one meeting, she asked if anyone had suggestions for optimizing a client's bottling process. Everyone went quiet. I raised my hand. What if we adjust the flow cycle instead of the staffing, I said. One change in timing could save 6 hours a week. She studied me for a long second, then nodded. Come by my office after. That was the start of everything. Patricia became my mentor, though she'd never admit the word. She'd call me out when I overreached, praise me when I earned it. You've got instinct, she said once, but instinct needs discipline. Learn both, and you'll eat this industry alive. Under her, I learned how to read companies like stories, their numbers, their culture, their weak spots. By 24, I was leading small projects, helping regional brands cut waste and modernize. Every win was a silent rebuttal to my mother's words. Still, success didn't silence the ache. Late at night, when I passed a grocery aisle and saw a bag of Mitchell's chips, stale design, fading brand, I'd feel that old spark of anger. They were running it into the ground. Grandma Helen's voice was always there. Make things better. By 27, I'd saved enough to take a leap. I met Patricia in a downtown cafe, heart hammering. I'm starting my own firm, I told her. She raised an eyebrow. Ambitious, risky, you'll need investors. I'll find them, I said. She smiled faintly. Of course you will. That was the day Peak Ventures was born. At first, it was just me, a laptop, and a rented co-working desk. My pitch was simple. Buy struggling food companies. Fix them. Sell them for more. It worked. I bought a failing sauce brand for $1 million, revamped it with better packaging, automation, and online sales, and sold it within a year for triple. Then came more. Snack brands, bakeries, frozen food lines. By 30, I was managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio. Patricia watched from a distance, proud but still strict. Don't chase revenge, she warned once. Chase results. But deep down, I knew revenge and results weren't so different. Every headline calling Peak Ventures the turnaround queen of the South felt like an answer to years of being told I was too young, too naive. Still, one ghost refused to stay buried. Mitchell's Foods. Even as my empire grew, that name haunted me. The logo, the smell of frying oil, the echo of Grandma Helen's heels on the factory floor. And every time I saw their sales decline in industry reports, it wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was sorrow. They'd ruined her dream. But someday I promised myself I'd come back for it. Not to destroy them, to make things better. By the time I turned 30, Peak Ventures had outgrown its first office, a cramped, converted warehouse space where the air smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. What began as me and a single assistant had become a team of analysts, strategists, and engineers. We weren't just buying companies. We were resurrecting them. The formula was simple on paper, but brutal in execution. Find struggling brands with potential, buy them quietly, modernize their operations, and rebrand them with precision. Each success added another layer to my armor. Our first big win was a failing snack manufacturer in Georgia. They were losing half their output to waste. My team and I walked the factory floors, counting seconds between conveyor cycles. We can fix this, I told their anxious plant manager. 6 months later, the plant was profitable again, because I'd installed automation my mother once mocked. Too young to understand business, she'd said. The irony wasn't lost on me. By 31, Peak Ventures had acquired 5 companies across the Southeast. I'd become the woman executives called when their brands were circling the drain. The turnaround architect, a magazine profile dubbed me. I read it once, smiled, and shoved it in a drawer. Praise wasn't the goal. Control was. And still, Mitchell's Foods haunted me. Every time I passed through a grocery store, I'd glance at the snack aisle. Their bags sat there, dusty, dated, untouched. Family owned since 1965, the label read, though the heart behind it was long gone. I'd hear Grandma Helen's voice in my mind, patient but firm, make things better. Then, one humid September morning, my phone buzzed with a call that would turn my world full circle. "Diane, it's Richard Holt," the voice said. Richard was an investment banker I'd worked with before, savvy, discreet. Mitchell's Foods is on the market. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "My family's company?" I asked, gripping the edge of my desk. "The same. They're bleeding cash, looking for a buyer fast." He rattled off numbers, valuation, liabilities, projected losses, but my brain had already leapt ahead. "How bad?" I asked quietly. "Revenue's down 30%. Equipment's outdated. They've lost 2 major distributors. They'll be lucky to get $15 million. I leaned back, staring out the office window. Jacksonville's skyline glittered under the noon sun, but my reflection in the glass looked distant. I thought about the girl who used to pack boxes in Montgomery, her hands sticky with chip dust, her grandmother's voice in her ear. $15 million. That was all they thought her life's work was worth now. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. Pulling up Peak Ventures' analytics system, I searched for Mitchell's Foods. The data didn't lie. Falling margins, outdated tech, 0 online presence. The brand was a corpse wearing its old uniform. But buried under the decay, I saw what no one else could see. Legacy, recognition, trust, the bones of something once great. My team wouldn't understand why this mattered. They didn't know the history, the betrayals, the late nights, the ghost of Grandma Helen watching from every corner of my ambition. So I didn't tell them, not yet. I spent the next week dissecting the company's numbers like an autopsy, distribution contracts, employee retention, production costs. Every page confirmed the same truth. Mom had run it into the ground chasing short-term profit. And then came the line that made my decision for me. Under primary owners, I saw it in black and white. Susan Myers, CEO, and Rose Myers, Vice President of Operations. The same names that once pushed me out were now desperate to cash out. The same hands that slammed the door in my face were now holding it open to the highest bidder. Richard called again the next morning. "You interested?" "More than you know," I said. He hesitated. "You'll have to move fast. They're closing the deal by Christmas." I smiled faintly. "Then it'll be a holiday to remember." After that call, I locked my office door and drew the blinds. On my desk sat the only photo I kept. Me at 10 years old, covered in flour, standing beside Grandma Helen in the factory kitchen. She was grinning, holding a spatula like a scepter. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. "Make things better," I whispered. And I would, but not as their daughter, as their buyer. That night, I called Richard back. "Don't list me or Peak Ventures as the bidder," I said. "Use a shell company. Keep it clean." He hesitated again. "You really want to stay anonymous?" "Yes," I said, "until the ink's dry." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A quiet, razor-edged calm. The same kind I'd felt the day I walked out of Mom's office at 22. This wasn't revenge, it was restoration. And I'd do it the way Grandma Helen taught me, quietly, precisely, and better than anyone else ever could. When Richard confirmed the sale date, I knew there was no room for hesitation. Mom and Rose were trying to offload Mitchell's Foods before the year ended, likely hoping to toast the deal over champagne and forget the company's slow collapse. They didn't know they'd already sold it, to me. Peak Ventures had handled stealth acquisitions before, but never one this personal. I moved in silence. At headquarters, my team thought it was just another turnaround, an aging food brand bleeding money. I called it Project M. No one questioned it. They trusted me, and I kept every trace of Mitchell's Foods out of the paperwork. Through a shell company registered in Delaware, Harborfield Holdings, I made the first bid, competitive, lean, and all cash. Mom and Rose would see only a professional offer from an anonymous buyer, nothing personal. Richard handled the back channels, negotiating terms as my proxy. "They're pushing hard to close before Christmas," he said one evening over the phone. "Your mother's impatient. Your sister's smug." "Let her be," I said. "Smug people don't see storms until they're standing in the rain." I spent the next 3 weeks living between two worlds. By day, I was the CEO of Peak Ventures, calm and composed in conference rooms, my tone even, my posture unshakable. By night, I was the daughter of Montgomery's fallen empire, pacing my penthouse apartment, rereading financials I already knew by heart. I couldn't tell Patricia. She'd see the risk, the emotional entanglement, and warn me off. So I worked alone, every move calculated. My team's reports filled my inbox. Automation plans, packaging redesigns, digital marketing roadmaps. They thought they were building a future for a client. They were rebuilding my past. One night, I sat at my desk long after midnight. The city lights below glowed like scattered embers, and the document on my screen bore a familiar name. Mitchell's Foods, Final Acquisition Agreement. Richard had emailed it 15 minutes earlier. The sale price, $15 million even. My grandmother's life's work reduced to a number. I signed with steady hands. Harborfield Holdings, authorized by Diane Myers. When I hit send, something in me shifted. It wasn't triumph, it was gravity, like the weight of generations pressing against my chest. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "I've got it, Grandma." Still, victory wasn't enough. The real challenge was ahead, showing my family what I'd done and making them understand why. In early December, Richard called again. "The deal's closed, wires confirmed, the board's been notified. Your mother thinks she sold Mitchell's Foods to a firm in Jacksonville." "Good," I said. "Keep it that way." He hesitated. "You're going home for Christmas?" I looked at the calendar, the date circled in red ink. "Yeah," I said. "Time to pay my respects." The week before Christmas, I flew back to Montgomery for the first time in 12 years. The city hadn't changed much. Same red brick buildings, same whisper of history in the air. But I had. The girl who'd once begged for a chance was gone. As I pulled up to my parents' house, the lights glittered across the front lawn, glowing too bright, too forced. The warmth felt staged, like everything Mom touched. Carol opened the door. Her smile was polite, her hug mechanical. "You made it," she said, already turning back toward the laughter spilling from the living room. Inside, the air smelled like cinnamon, money, and tension. Brian nodded from the couch, half distracted by his phone. Aunt Linda fussed over appetizers. My father, James, stood by the fireplace, older, grayer, quieter. And then there was Mom, poised, immaculate, every hair in place. She greeted me like a guest, not a daughter. "Diane," she said, her tone cool. "You look successful." I smiled, matching her restraint. "You too." The dining room gleamed. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, everything choreographed. But beneath it, I could feel the undercurrent, the secret they thought I didn't know, the sale, the celebration. When Rose finally walked in, late as always, she leaned down to kiss Mom's cheek and gave me a smirk that could cut glass. "Didn't expect you to show," she said. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. That night, I could not sleep. I stood by my old window, staring out at the backyard oak that had outlived every argument. Tomorrow would be the reckoning. Mom and Rose would make their announcement, drunk on pride, convinced they'd sold off the last piece of me. And I'd let them have their moment, right until I took it back. As dawn crept in, I could almost hear Grandma Helen's voice through the rustle of leaves. "Make things better." I smiled faintly. "I will," I whispered, "even if it breaks them first." Christmas night glittered like a performance that had rehearsed itself 1,000 times. The dining room was lit by soft amber light, gold-rimmed plates catching the glow of the chandelier. Everything was perfect, unnaturally perfect, like a photograph staged to hide the cracks. Mom stood at the head of the table in a deep green dress, the kind she wore for fundraisers, not family. Rose sat to her right, polished and smug, her red lipstick too deliberate. Carol and Brian chattered about nothing, fake laughter filling the air, while the smell of roasted turkey and wine hung heavy. Dad sat quietly at the far end, his tie loosened, eyes tired. Aunt Linda passed the potatoes like she was passing peace offerings no one wanted. I took my seat, steady and smiling. I'd played this role before. The daughter returned, tolerated but irrelevant, only this time the script was mine. Halfway through dinner, Mom tapped her glass. Clink. The sound cut the conversation like a blade. "I have an announcement," she said. Rose's smile widened, as if she were waiting for her cue. Mom raised her glass, pride swelling in her tone. "As of this week, Mitchell's Foods has been sold to Peak Ventures, a Jacksonville investment firm, for $15 million. Applause burst from my siblings. Carol whooped, Brian clapped. "Finally," he said, laughing. "About time we cashed out." My jaw stayed relaxed, my hands folded in my lap. The mask held. Mom wasn't finished. "Anne," she said, glancing at me, "Diane gets nothing. She walked away years ago. She's not entitled to any share." The air thickened. Even the fireplace crackled quieter, like it was listening. Rose leaned back, sipping her wine with satisfaction. "Actions have consequences," she said softly, eyes on me. I let a heartbeat pass, then another. Then I smiled, slow, deliberate. "That's interesting, Mom." Every head turned toward me. "Because," I said, my voice calm as glass, "I'm the one who bought Mitchell's Foods." The silence was instant. Mom's smile faltered, confusion flickering like a candle in the wind. What did you say?" "I'm Peak Ventures," I said clearly, "the company you sold to." Dad choked on his drink. Rose froze mid-sip. Carol's mouth fell open. Mom's wineglass trembled in her hand, a thin thread of red dripping down her wrist. "That's not possible," she whispered. I tilted my head. "It's not only possible, it's done." Rose slammed her hand on the table. "You went behind our backs?" I didn't flinch. "I went through legal channels, actually. Clean paperwork. Confidential bids. You signed everything yourselves." "You lied," she spat. "No," I said evenly. "I just didn't tell you. There's a difference." Mom's voice cracked. "You had no right." "None?" I cut in. "You mean the same rights you stripped from me when you fired me at 22? When you told me I wasn't cut out for the family business? When you sold Grandma Helen's legacy to fund Rose's restaurant fantasy?" Rose's face turned crimson. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said, leaning forward. "I overheard your little planning session last night in the study. 15 million for the sale, 10 million straight into Rose's restaurant chain. You were selling our grandmother's name to pay for her ego." The color drained from Mom's face. You were spying on us?" "I was listening," I said, "for once." Carol shifted uncomfortably. "Diane, maybe we can all just—" "Stay out of it," Rose snapped. "Enough!" Dad's voice thundered, startling even Mom. He stood, palms flat on the table. "This is madness. We're family." I looked at him. "Family doesn't mean ownership, Dad. It's supposed to mean respect." He deflated, his voice quieter. "Why didn't you just tell us?" "Because if you knew," I said, "you'd have sabotaged it." Rose laughed bitterly. "You think this makes you a hero? You stole from us." "No," I said softly. "I saved what you didn't deserve to keep." The words landed like a verdict. The room fractured. Brian muttered something under his breath. Carol pushed her plate away. Aunt Linda looked at me with quiet awe. Mom's shoulders sagged, her power unraveling before everyone's eyes. "You'll regret this," she whispered. I stood, my voice steady. "Maybe, but Grandma Helen won't." I looked around the table, taking in their stunned faces, every smirk, every sneer that had once made me doubt myself. "This company," I said, "was never about money. It was about legacy, about pride in doing something right. You forgot that. I didn't." For a long moment, no one moved. The chandelier flickered, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then I smiled faintly. "Merry Christmas." And I walked out, heels clicking against the hardwood, leaving their silence to echo behind me, like applause after a truth too heavy to deny. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. The house glowed behind me, its windows bright but hollow. I stood there a moment, letting the winter wind cut through the heat of everything I'd said. In that quiet, I heard Grandma Helen's voice again. Soft, certain, proud. "Make things better." "I will," I whispered. Then I turned and walked toward my car, leaving the house and the ghosts inside it behind. Back in Jacksonville, the quiet of my office felt almost holy after the chaos of that dinner. The skyline shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath me steady. I had Mitchell's Foods back. The question now was what to do with it. The morning after Christmas, I called an emergency meeting with my senior team. None of them knew the truth, that Project M was my family's legacy, but I could see curiosity in their eyes as I rolled out the new directive. "We're not flipping this one," I said. "We're rebuilding it. Automation, e-commerce, a total rebrand." They exchanged glances, but no one argued. My COO simply nodded. Understood. For the next 6 months, we tore the company down to its bones and rebuilt it from the ground up. The factory in Montgomery buzzed again, this time with modern lines, efficient systems, and fairer wages. The new logo read Mitchell's Foods, better made since 1965. The tagline was mine, but the spirit belonged to Grandma Helen. I visited the plant one humid spring morning. The smell of frying oil hit me like a memory. Workers smiled when they recognized my last name. Others didn't know who I was and simply nodded as I walked by. Both reactions felt right. This wasn't about ego. It was about legacy, continuing without the poison that once tainted it. Revenue climbed. Online orders flooded in. Within 3 months, Mitchell's Foods was profitable for the first time in years. Industry magazines called it the South's most remarkable comeback. I framed the article, not for bragging rights, but as proof that faith and discipline could outlast betrayal. Then came the fallout. Word spread quickly in Montgomery about who had really bought the company. At first there were whispers, curious, skeptical. Then the story hit the local business paper. Daughter saves legacy. Diane Myers quietly reclaims Mitchell's Foods. Mom stopped showing up to Chamber of Commerce events. Her allies withdrew, embarrassed by how easily she'd been outplayed. Rose's restaurant venture collapsed when her investors pulled out, afraid of bad press. Carol and Brian stopped defending them publicly. The family name they'd weaponized now belonged to the one person they'd tried to erase. Dad called one night. I almost didn't answer, but something in me still wanted closure. His voice was weary. "Your mother isn't well," he said. She knows what happened." "I know," I said softly. "She never meant—" "She did," I interrupted, gently but firmly. "And so did Rose." Silence stretched between us, heavy and unfixable. Finally he whispered, "You did what Helen would have wanted." That was enough. Weeks later, I drove to the small cemetery outside Montgomery, where Grandma Helen was buried. The headstone was simple. Helen Myers, builder, dreamer, doer. I knelt beside it, brushing a few leaves from the base. "I did it," I said quietly. "It's better now." A warm wind stirred the grass, carrying the faint scent of salt and potatoes from a nearby factory vent, the same smell that had followed me all my life. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the machines hum through me like a heartbeat. That night, back in Jacksonville, I met Patricia for dinner. She'd heard whispers about my acquisition and raised a glass when I sat down. "So," she said with a grin, "you finally bought your ghosts." "Maybe," I said, smiling, "but I turned them into something worth keeping." She clinked her glass against mine. "You always had the discipline. The heart just caught up." For the first time, I let myself laugh. Not the practiced kind, but the real, weary, joyful kind that comes after a storm finally breaks. Mitchell's Foods continued to grow. Within a year, we opened new distribution channels, partnered with local farms, and launched a scholarship in Grandma Helen's name for young women in food science. Her portrait now hangs in the renovated Montgomery plant, her eyes bright and knowing. Sometimes I walk the floor quietly before dawn, the way she used to. The workers don't always recognize me. They just see a woman checking the lines, humming under her breath. That's how I like it. Because legacy isn't about names on plaques or family trees. It's about what you build when no one's watching, what endures after every betrayal, every scar. When people ask what I learned from it all, I tell them the truth. That family can fail you, but purpose never will. That silence can be strategy, not surrender. And that sometimes the only way to honor the past is to outgrow it. I look at Mitchell's Foods now, a company reborn, and I don't see revenge. I see restoration. Grandma Helen's words still echo in my head every time I walk through those factory doors. Make things better. And I finally did.